Remedy's Control puts you in the boots of Jess Faden, who has been haunted by a supernatural event that took place in her hometown of Ordinary 17 years ago. She finds the headquarters of the clandestine Federal Bureau of Control, a building called the Oldest House. Jess has one goal in mind and knows that the Federal Bureau of Control was present during the supernatural event that took place all those years ago. As Jess enters the building, things get absolutely crazy. She meets a creepy janitor that looks like he's been pulled right out of an episode of The Twilight Zone, then suddenly she becomes the director of the FBC after a strange ritual and having to fight a supernatural force called the Hiss. If this all sounds confusing to you, then you're not alone.
And this gun's alive. You know what? I'm happy.
We won't spoil the story for you, but the best way to describe Control's story is that it's a mix of X-Files, Twilight Zone and Stranger Things all thrown into a melting pot to create something truly intriguing and memorable. Control was the first game that we read every piece of lore found throughout the game, from redacted documents to correspondence between agency employees, watching research videos on the astral plane, objects of power and more.
Objects of power can cause or be results of AWE's altered world events, intrusions upon the perceived reality. A side note, remember to cover their connection to the astral plane as well. Now, the service weapon is, of course, a prime example of an OOP, a very powerful one.
This brings us to the game's combat and character progression. You'll be using Jess's service weapon throughout the game, and it is also the first object of power that you acquire. The service weapon has a handful of forms that you can unlock throughout the story, and those can be upgraded by adding mods that, for example, can increase damage when your health is low. Forms including Scatter, which act like a shotgun, Spin, which act like a submachine gun, Pierce, which delivers high damage, armor-piercing shots, and a couple others. We won't spoil everything for you. Remedy definitely went with the less is more approach when it comes to both the game's weapon forms and abilities. You only have a handful of telekinetic abilities at your disposal, from the ability to throw objects at enemies to taking control of an enemy for a period of time and a bit more. When you combine the abilities and the weapon forms together, it makes for some extremely intense and surprisingly deep combat. Control doesn't hold your hand as it's a challenging experience. You have to keep moving to avoid damage, combine telekinetic abilities and weapon forms to take down enemies, and really focus on what you're doing. For example, some enemies have airy red shields around them that make your bullets ineffective. You need to throw objects to break these shields while watching your energy meter to still have enough energy to dodge these attacks. Then you have flying enemies who dodge your throws, invisible enemies, and a whole lot more that are so frightening to walk into for the first time. The same goes for the game's puzzles, which aren't all too difficult, but if you aren't paying attention to the game's brilliant environmental storytelling, pieces of lore found throughout the agency's headquarters, and more, you might get stuck for quite a while on these puzzles. In many games, puzzles feel like an unwanted chore, but in Control, every one of them furthers the story in an interesting way, as we never felt frustrated by any of these. Everything in Control is just so well paced, from discovering more abilities to finding objects of power and learning how to use them in the astral plane, to the mysterious and intriguing supernatural horror sci-fi story that kept us on the edge of our seats, and the exhilarating and challenging combat. Not to mention the game's environmental storytelling and gorgeous graphics that just ooze atmosphere. However, Control isn't perfect, as the game does have a few minor issues. Enemies respawn a bit too quickly for our liking, and if you die, which you definitely will, you have to fight through all the waves of enemies again. Then, we also ran into a few bugs, and at one stage, Jess had a box around her body that was stuck there for like 20 minutes. Thankfully, these issues do not break the game, and they are few and far between, as we only experienced about 3 bugs in roughly 20 hours of play. The game also features some RPG elements as you gain more ability points from completing quests to increase Jess's power, from more health and energy to more interesting mechanics such as the ability to use your telekinetic powers to grab a rock in midair and throw it back at your enemy. Then you can upgrade your character further with personal mods and upgrade your service weapon by collecting enough essence and rare materials from the enemies and environments. This all combines to deliver a gameplay experience that we didn't want to put down. The only real boring parts of the game are some side quests, for example having to throw barrels into a furnace. However, even these tasks further the story in a way, so they're well worth the effort. Then you also have some challenges to complete called the board countermeasures, for example killing 50 enemies without dying, which you can pick up at the control points. There is a bit of backtracking in Control as well, as you gain clearance levels throughout the game, opening up more doors for the player. Side quests also send you back into some areas sometimes, but it all delivers a sense of exploration as you head into the sections that were previously not accessible to you. These areas then hold more lore to uncover and more creepy things to find, making backtracking to some areas somewhat enjoyable. In the end, Control delivers a brilliant story that kept us on the edge of our seats for roughly 20 hours. The story pacing is simply fantastic, and for every bit of combat and puzzle solving, there's new mysteries to uncover through environmental storytelling and collectibles. Combined with the fantastic story is the combat and movement that just feels so incredibly smooth and responsive, making it a near perfect all-around experience that looks and feels great. We did find a few technical issues, but those were rare in our playthrough. Enemies felt like they did respawn a bit too quickly, but with combat as satisfying as it is in Control, we didn't mind that at all. Control for us is a sleeper hit of 2019. It is a brilliant title that you definitely should not miss out on. That's why we've scored the game 9.2 out of 10. Are you looking forward to Control and thinking of picking it up? Let us know down below. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please consider liking and subscribing, and until next time, farewell.